Richard there. She's gone where the gamblers go below, 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 yo-ho. Let's up and laugh and sing, and ring the bell, just ding dong, the merry-o. Sing it high, sing it low, let them know the Wicked Richard there.
Welcome to April's Come Close the Band podcast. And we have a window open, and there is nature outside and not coldness.
I love this time of year where we can finally open the studio window and let in the light.
Yeah, it's spring.
You get the occasional jumbo jet flying overhead.
And birds tweeting
even tweeting for added authenticity.
Anywho, we are here for April's podcast. We're only doing 5 albums this time.
Right.
But what 5 albums they are.
Oh, what 5
albums? We
albums?
have Justin Timberlake, The 2020 Experience, Paramore, John Grant, Pale Green Ghosts, Depeche Mode, Delta Machine, and The Leisure Society, Alone Aboard the Ark. So, probably the biggest release of the last
20 years.
few weeks would undoubtedly be latest from Justin Timberlake. I'm not sure if this is his 4th, maybe, solo album.
I couldn't tell you.
And this one's called The 2020 Experience. So, what kind of experience was it for you?
Okay, Justin Timberlake. He's responsible for killing one of my alternative music careers, so I'm not going to let him do it twice. Right. Actually, this album, when you listen to it from the perspective of a 30-year-old gentleman getting on now, it's not half bad. When you put forward Justin Timberlake as an option for this particular podcast, I sort of
recoiled in horror
and thought, oh no. But actually, in terms of this album, and I don't know whether it's a maturity or whatever it is, it's not a half bad listen at all. I think in terms of the genre, in terms of the style, in terms of the lyrical content, he's very much pushing towards. Okay, I'm going to come out and say it. I think this is very much a successor to Michael Jackson.
Which has been said by a number of people.
I know it's been said
about
before,
him generally.
I know it's been said about him generally, but I think this album very much cements that notion that was kicking around a few years ago, that Justin Timberlake is very much a successor to what Michael Jackson did in terms of bringing together funk, soul, disco, contemporary pop, and a little bit of R&B thrown in for good measure.
I wouldn't disagree with that, actually. I think this is actually... Well, I'll get away with my problem with the album to start off with, and the thing that I think stops it from actually being a very good record and just keeps it at being a good one. And that's the fact that if we just go down the length of tracks, 8 minutes, 5.5, 7, 8, 6.5, 7, a little more restraint and self-indulgence.
Yes.
And the tightening up of some of the tracks on this album, I think, would have made it infinitely better.
Yeah.
However, that said, I do agree with you that there's definitely, when you listen to, I suppose modern pop, soul, R&B these days, a lot of it is just a dirge to me, I have to confess. And here, this is definitely superior version and quality of that kind of music, even from the kind of start off with Push a Love Girl with it, I'm just a junkie for your love, and stuff like that. Suit and Tie, same again. It got this kind of really great kind of pop soul vibe going through it. Again, as you said, you've got that kind of Jackson thing coming in. You've almost got the direct Michael Jackson refs in, obviously, Don't Hold the Wall. And then I suppose you get even when you let the groove in, you get that kind of African rhythmic kind of thing going on, which also harks back to Michael Jackson, I suppose, and even Lionel Richie. Outside of that, you've just got some really excellent pop moments, pure pop moments. I'm thinking particularly of Tunnel Vision and Mirrors, which was, I think was
the single, isn't it?
Single, which I think made it number 1 this year.
Yeah.
Which are both just great, straightforward pop songs. Really can't fault them. If I do, and there's a great kind of a whole is it That Girl, when it's the kind of the JT and the Tennessee King, the kind of which is the kind of Isaac Hayes. Kind of funk groove thing going on with the brass to the fore, which is slightly probably a bit more Prince than Michael Jackson, including the long guitar solo on it, which is very Prince-like. So yeah, I actually quite liked it. Lyrically, it does veer on the typical kind of rapper, kind of juvenile rap, that stroke heavy metal lyrics when it comes to talking about relationships and women. I mean, Strawberry Bubblegum. Oh, you mean her? Oh, yes.
Yes,
yeah.
her again.
Oh, yes, that's so very juvenile.
Yeah.
So I think that's a bit of a failing. Obviously, on the first 2 tracks, there is some rap, which is not needed and detracts from...
Yeah, I think Jay-Z makes
yes, on Push Around, Suit and Tie, and I wish he hadn't bothered.
On Suit and Tie in particular, it really detracts from actually a quality track. And I like Jay-Z, and we've talked about Jay-Z on the podcast before, and it sort of just feels like, oh, here we go, another, and we've talked about this before as well, another artist shoehorned in to tick a particular box or make a particular market.
Yeah.
But that aside, and I completely agree with your point on length as well in terms of tightening up. This, had it been just a little bit shorter in places, could have been a classic album. As it is, I think it's a really good Justin Timberlake album.
Yeah.
Which surprised me.
It surprised me too. If I'm being brutally honest with you, it surprised me too. I just thought it was an album we should review. I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did.
No, likewise.
So, well, that's the first shock over then. Pete and Scott
both... It's a podcast of shocks.
Yeah. Pete and Scott both think Justin Timberlake album actually okay. So, moving on, and I was going to say change of musical styles, and it is a bit. And I only realised the other day, we actually, on our very first proper podcast, we reviewed the last Paramore album.
Did we?
2009.
Good grief, did we? Gosh.
Yeah. That's how long we've been doing it.
Wow.
And we've built up that huge listener following to,
3
or 4 by now, yeah.
Well, I know my wife has stopped listening, so yeah.
I know, yeah. So anyway, this is Paramore's 4th album. And,
Paramore.
And it's the first without their founding members, Josh and Zach Farrow, I had to write this bit down, who kind of fell out with Hayley Williams, the singer, and according to them, they kind of felt she was trying to both water down their kind of Christian beliefs and the band's hard rock sound. I mean, these were Paramore are one of these bands that have kind of quite happily kind of balanced on that kind of metal emo punk pop thing for the last few years, meaning they've been at home in the pages of Kerrang as they have been in kind of teen pop kind of magazines. And I think also one of the brothers kind of thought that they were becoming a bit of a manufactured product of the major label.
Okay.
So anyway, the accusation is basically that the band were becoming less rock and less pop, and it would be hard to argue against that on the strength of this album. Whether or not that's a bad thing or a good thing is another matter altogether, of course. We have 2 ex-Nin people involved. Justin Mendel Johnson, who's is the producer, and also an ex-Nin drummer, apparently.
Right.
Alan Ribbon.
Okay.
Also involved in the album.
Okay. Name. Now that name does ring a bell.
Yeah. So I mean, this is again this album. Same with Timberlake album. This album goes on too long. That's one thing I'll say straight from the off. And it's another album that's 65 minutes, which is way too long.
We did review a lot of long albums this time.
Yeah.
That was possibly why we've only managed 5.
Yes. So
as opposed to the usual 6.
So there's that.
Yeah.
However, and there's no doubt that all remnants of the kind of heavy metal kind of emo edge have been pretty much sanded down and completely off, and you're kind of left with something that's more akin to Pink, No Doubt type pop rock kind of numbers. So the things, songs like Now and Grow Up, and the current single Still Into You, which is very much No Doubt-ish.
Yeah, very much so.
But actually in a good way. I think that's a really good. I actually think Into You is a really good track. Yeah. And similarly, elsewhere you've got things like It Ain't Fun, which is very much a pure kind of pop song. There's no hint of it being rock, really. No Doubt crop up again on a couple of other tracks. Opener, Fast in My Car, which I quite like, actually reminded me a bit of kind of Elastica Sleeper, kind of almost Britpop kind of 90s.
But with a sort of industrial edge to it as well. Yeah.
And obviously you got Daydreaming, which pretty much rips off Dreaming by Blondie, particularly in the chorus of it. But then you've got what makes the album actually quite interesting. You've got a couple of interludes, which are kind of ukulele-based little ditties, which are kind of akin to Ingrid Michaelson type stuff. And then when you get to the end of the album, you've also got a couple of tracks that are more like kind of Rilo Kiley kind of country pop almost, but in a kind of interesting way. So I was thinking more of One of Those Crazy Girls and Hate to See Your Heart Break, which I actually think are two of the more interesting tracks on the album. So I kind of thought it was, all right for what it is. Sure to sell well, and there's at least 3, 4, 5 potential hit singles on it, particularly in America. So yeah, it was alright.
I'd add to that lyrically, I thought it was quite strong in places as well, as opposed to say some of the pop, the manufactured, and you can hear the manufactured feel to it in places, and you can understand why perhaps some of the band members have departed with that criticism ringing in the remaining band members' ears. But actually, in terms of lyrical content, again, in one or two of the tracks, I actually thought that it was quite engaging in places as well, more so than perhaps. I've never really been a Pink fan, never really been a No Doubt fan. I actually think this stands apart still in some ways. Yeah. But it had that sort of strength to it that maybe those other artists, those more established artists, don't have. So I mean, I thought it was, again, a long album, but that aside, a good mix of rock, alt pop, shall we call it?
Yeah,
and as you say, the odd ukulele thrown in there as well for good measure. A good album, a good album. Not a great album, but a good album.
Well, can this praise continue? We'll ask ourselves. We move on now to a gentleman who I was only aware of vaguely, but not musically, I suppose. John Grant. The reason I was aware of him at all is because this is his second solo album, and his first solo album was didn't particularly sell very well, but was scored very highly with critics and cropped up on a lot of Best Album of the Year lists a few years back. Before that, I think he was in a band called The Stars, who, again, I'm not really familiar with.
On that point, I was very surprised to read, and we'll come to this in a moment, that first solo album was very much a folk album.
Yes. Well, yes, which obviously I'll get onto, which is not to say there aren't moments of that on here, but yes, he is a man that's obviously not afraid to move out of his comfort zone, shall we say. So John Grant, Pale Green Ghosts. What do we think of Mr. Grant?
Again, I think it was in the opening chords of Pale Green Ghosts where the classic 1980s synthesizers kicked in.
Yeah, I was thinking Prince Sign of the Times.
And I thought this album could have been made, and sounds like it could have been made 30 years ago. It was just, certainly in places, an absolute joy to listen to. Completely pure electronic music, but applied in an alternative fashion. As you say, could have been Prince, could have been Royd Scott. You remember them from about 10 years ago?
Yeah.
So certainly a Scandinavian influence as well.
In fact, I think
he's in Iceland now.
Iceland, yeah. He's recorded with a guy from one of the bands in Iceland.
And it still has that sort of. It still has that alternative outlet throughout it. I think Sinead O'Connor features.
She does. She provides backing vocals on a number of the tracks.
A number of the tracks, exactly. A very personal album as well. Again, a very lyrically strong album.
I love this album.
This is an album I will return to once we're done and dusted. I know I say that every time, but actually on this occasion I do mean it, because I was completely drawn into the world he created, and the more the further the album progresses, the more you realise what a personal world that is as well. He talks a lot about his personal experiences, a lot about his former love life, his current situation as well.
Yes, HIV.
He is HIV positive. So it's an album of regrets, but it's also an album of celebration.
Yeah, I think that sums it up quite nicely. I was same with you. This is an album that I will certainly be listening to again, and in fact have gone back to in the last couple of days a couple of times. Quite simply because the quality of the songwriting is so good, and actually the lyrics are great. Again, I had to write down some of these because there was a couple of bits that I just loved. And the second track, Black Belt, which is there's a great couplet in it, which is hit your head on the playground at recess, etch a sketch your way out of this one, reject.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that's just a genius line. Etch a sketch your way out of this one. I just thought, oh. That's the kind of thing. If anyone out there that actually has ever tried writing songs and stuff will appreciate the fact that that's the kind of thing you would, if you wrote that, you would just sit back and kind of put your feet up and go, "My work here is done.
Wow,
excellent."
There's a later reference to Agent Orange in the track Vietnam as well.
Yes, silence is a weapon like a nuclear bomb. Yeah,
which is just the way he brings in Agent Orange and then encapsulates Vietnam as a backdrop to the song. It's just genius.
Yeah, and also you got the Why Don't You Love Me Anymore, which is again about being left by someone, so again being in a relationship and left, which comes back to the end in Glacier at the end as well, which apologies for swearing here, but the lyrics kind of go, I hate this fucking town, you can't even leave your fucking house without running into someone who no longer cares about you. Which again I just thought was a lovely kind of sentiment and the kind of feeling that we've all been through if you've been in a relationship and the person you're going out with still kind of like lives in your neighbourhood or whatever. But yeah, this is an album that made me want to check out the previous album that all the critics raved about, actually, to see, because you're thinking if the quality of that first album was anywhere near this, then I'm not surprised that it was a hit with critics. And again, on the strength of listening to this, I wouldn't be surprised to find this album also cropping up on critics' lists come the end of the year.
Certainly deserves to be.
So,
wow.
Moving on to the mode.
Hey!
DM by DM.
DM. Oh, I never noticed that. Wow. Insight. Wow.
Yeah, it takes somebody as kind of anal as me to realise that obviousness.
Peter falls off his chair. Yeah. You clear your Delta Machine. Depeche Mode, Delta Machine.
What album is this?
This is the...
Yep, I thought so. Yeah. First in the years since Sound of the Universe.
Sound of the Universe. 4 years. I can't.
The previous one. That's 2009, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This is interesting, I suppose, because interesting, I guess, because all the talk around it, at least when it's coming out. I think the band were as guilty as anybody in this. Was the kind of perceived desire from fans and the band to try and recapture some of that kind of Violator songs of faith and devotion kind of vibe feeling from the early 90s essentially. And I suppose the question is A, whether they succeeded, and B, if they did succeed, whether or not it's a good thing or not. And I kind of think it's a mixture of yes and no on both counts really. There's no doubting that this is a good album. First of all, I should say that, and I think it's a better album than the previous album.
Yeah. Entirely agree.
Yeah, and it
wholeheartedly.
Kicks off brilliantly. You've got Welcome to My World and the Nick Cave-ish Angel that start off the album, which I think are both brilliant tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah, still for me, the less said about Heaven.
Heaven is
the better, because I still just can't listen to it without just thinking Sour Times.
Yeah.
By Portishead. And,
it sits better here.
It works better in the context of the album.
On the context of the album.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But it still kind of brings down what had been a really strong start to the album into a kind of.
I can't understand why they didn't push Angel out first, but
no. Yes, I agree. Which it's a much better track. Elsewhere on the album, you've got a couple of kind of, particularly if you're going back to that whole kind of feel of Violator's songs and Faith and Devotion, you've got that typical kind of Martin Gore kind of musical guitar riff thing going on, so on, slow, and Goodbye. And again, I was also thinking kind of Delta Blues riff as well. You're thinking maybe that was the thinking behind the thing of that. So you got that. You've got some great sing-along pop. I'm thinking "Soothe My Soul" in particular. You've got some classic DM in kind of Broken, Soft Touch, Raw Nerve. And you've got some other interesting stuff like "Should Be Higher" and "Alone," which are also good.
All very good.
But there's something, I don't know. For me, there's still something missing from it to make it really kind of gel for me. And
Alan Wilder.
Perhaps. And it made it more so when I decided to go back and listen to some. I mean, I suppose this is one of the things that interested me about this particular thing, since we're both Depeche Mode fans. So it meant I was going back to listening to some.
Yeah. Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Other stuff. And we've had part of this conversation previously. Yeah. But Playing the Angel, so I went back to both Playing the Angel and even back to 2001's Exciter albums. And for a start off, Playing the Angel, which came out
2005,
is a much better album.
Playing the Angel, it for me remains their standout album since the mid-90s, and like Delta Machine was a much more of a solid, much more of a well-crafted, continuous album with a theme that ran through it, with something that pulled it together. My problem with Sounds of the Universe, which followed it, was it was an okay album. It had some great material on it, but it did it kind of fell apart from. And then you start to listen, you re-listen to it, and you think, well, actually, that's not. And anyway, let's not go into that. But that was sort of a few loose hanging threads. Whereas I think Playing the Angel and this particularly, everything just sort of pulls together. I mean, in terms of this album, in relation to the last two, they've all been produced by Ben Hillier, who's worked with Elbow in the past, and Blur as well. But this is very much the Ben Hillier. This is the close of the Ben Hillier trilogy. And it very much feeds back into Playing the Angel. It sort of closes the circle in terms of the themes. Again, we're talking about angels. Again, we're talking about universes. This is going to be the Angel Universe trilogy. This is going to be that Berlin Part 2 at some point. So it does that. But the surprise for me on this album, more so than the previous two, is Dave Gahan's lyrical writing.
Yes.
Dave Gahan's tracks on here, surprisingly, are some of the stronger tracks.
I would agree with that, definitely. I mentioned some of them, Broken and Should Be Higher.
Should Be Higher, but even Secret to the End, which cheekily steals a riff from one of the Ultra period tracks, is a really strong track. Sort of after the sort of slight dampening of Heaven, sort of brings it back up again. And I do agree to that. Well, you were sort of alluding to the Violator Songs of Faith debate that's been happening in the run up to this album coming out. I disagree with that. I actually think it delves a little bit deeper, and we're back to music for the masses. And in fact, in some of the tracks, and certainly on side 2, there's even a touch of an updated Speak and Spell about it. And again, when we talk about collaborations, Dave Gahan's obviously benefited from his work with Soul Savers the last year or so in terms of his lyrical writing. Martin Gore has benefited from his collaboration with Vince Clarke. There's a couple of tracks in here where there are what sound like a couple of discarded VCMG riffs that have been pulled together, dusted off, and put into something with lyrics, which but not in a way that sounds recycled, but actually just taking a little piece of something there and building it into something else.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, but I would have still preferred there to have been kind of a bit more of that. I mean, for me, like I said, it sounds like I'm criticising an album that I actually think is quite good, but I suppose it's because
likewise.
But I suppose it's because you have kind of expectations than anything else, and you get disappointed where bands. Well, I suppose it's that class thing. You get disappointed bands if don't do anything new, and then if they do something new, then you get. Yeah. But for me, this album, the problem with this album for me, and the last album to a certain extent, was it just sounds like, to a degree, like a band not taking chances. For a band that evolved as they did, and as their sound evolved through the 80s and through the 90s, it seems perhaps a shame, and perhaps I'm being too overcritical, that the kind of evolution, risk taking seems to have ended perhaps with whatchamacallit, the other album we were talking about a minute ago.
Exciter?
Yes, Exciter.
Right, okay.
Exciter, which is I think probably their most difficult album to listen to.
It is, yeah.
In the fact that it's not full of immediate songs. It's almost a kind of ballad album.
Yeah,
really.
I listened to it again recently, and I entirely agree.
But I actually think it's their most interesting album since the 90s, because it is the most challenging. It's not kind of except for what you call it, first track,
Dream On,
which is just a brilliant piece of, well, just brilliant. But it's not. But actually, it's weird because it's totally unreflective of the rest of the record. But I think that album is just. Things like is it When Body Speaks or When Body Speaks?
When the Body Speaks, the sort of very that's very Violator, that track, actually.
And Sweetest Condition and stuff like that. It's just really kind of oppressive, introverted kind of stuff, but so typical DM, but trying to be slightly different. And I would have liked something not the same as that, because that's you want something different. But I'd have preferred a bit more. A bit more interest.
All right, okay. I disagree in part, because I actually think this album sounds like it could be recorded by anyone in 2013. I mean that as a compliment. It sounds fresh. It doesn't sound like Depeche Mode's greatest hits reheated. I think they are pushing for something original in part. Okay, exclude Angel from what I just said, because that is a classic Songs of Faith pulling together of gospel and blues and Depeche Mode from that era. But in other parts of the album, I think they are.
Just Touch Raw Nerve could have been on any early Depeche Mode album.
I suppose it could. My other disappointment, if we're going to talk about disappointments, is Martin Gore's vocal track on here as well. The Child Inside, which I think. Can
we just say it's shy to move on?
Well, it sounds like the track he's recorded on the last 3 or 4 albums, and that's harsh. It sounds harsher than I mean it to be, but it's true. But I think other than those sort of 2 points, and Angel, of course, I love. I think it's a really good Depeche Mode album. I think it's one of their greats, and I completely appreciate where you're coming from in terms of Exciter. And in terms of doing something different, I think this does do something different.
Oh my god!
I think that's the first time we've disagreed about an album we both actually really like.
It is a unique position, isn't it? It is a unique position, thinking, yes, we're both saying this is a great album, and disagreeing on it. Yeah.
Good. Let's move on.
Let's move on to lighter things in more ways than one.
Yeah.
And the third album from the Leisure Society, Alone Aboard the Ark.
Yeah.
Leisure Society are a band led by a guy called Nick Hemming. and their music has been described as kind of pastoral kind of pop, which I think is probably folky pastoral pop, which I think is probably an accurate summation of the general sound of their music. So much so that it's when you listen to any of their albums, and this one is no different in that front, you can tell that that Hemming has a like for Ray Davies, whose studio this was recorded in, Squeeze, and perhaps other kindred spirits such as Neil Hannon, and I'd even go as far as to say Amy Mann.
Yeah.
And particularly with Neil Hannon thing, the songs on his album like Life is a Cabriolet and One Man and His Fugue, I think are particularly reminiscent of Neil Hannon's output. And this is just it's just a lovely record, really. It's just a lovely pop record. From the opening track, which is A Softer Voice Takes Longer Hearing, which is just a great title in its own thing, which is just a gentle song with a simple but hooky chorus. Through to kind of upbeat pop tunes like Fight for Everyone, which is kind of Squeeze meets pulp with lo-fi synths and electronic drums, which would make a great single. I don't know if it is going to be a single, but I think it would be, a potential hit, dare I say it. Everyone Understands, which is very similar to some of the tracks on the last album. Tearing Down the Arches, which reminded me a bit of it was almost like kind of blending early Britpop with 70s Alvin Stardust.
Yes.
And it has the line in it, "Legend in My Own Lunchtime," which is one I used to use a lot as a child. So I kind of so if no other reason, that song appealed to me greatly, certainly for that reason. And All I've Seen as well, which again is another one that has a great lyric in it, because it starts off and I think this sounds like something else. And then one of the opening lyrics of it is, "Got a song in my head and it's driving me mad." And I'm thinking, yes, that's exactly how I feel about this song. It's reminding me of something. So you've got the hints of 60s gospel pop instrumentation, and again with a kind of Squeeze-like guitar solo over the top. And it's just, the album's full of very seemingly slight, but I think actually when you dig down, kind of deeper and more kind of affecting, just classic pop songs.
Agree. It's got a warmth to it. I was trying to recall our listening of the previous album and this album. It hasn't. The sound hasn't moved on.
No, it hasn't changed greatly. No.
But in this case, it's cool because it's such a lovely warm sound. If anything, there was a touch of swing to this album as well.
There is a bit of
there
is a bit of jazz and stuff.
Yeah, a little a few jazz riffs here and there, just peppered through the album. It did keep me interested because it was just doing something a little bit different. It does have that sort of warmth and friendliness to it throughout, and it's very hard to sort of fault.
It was also by far the shortest album we'd released.
Yeah, which is after all the previous 4 hours we've discussed was a blessed relief, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
As a legend in my lunchtime, I was able to listen to it in my lunchtime as well, which is great. It's Ray Davies hadn't thought of. But I know exactly what you're saying. I actually weirdly thought of the Beach Boys. It doesn't sound anything like the Beach Boys, but
no, but
that's sort of
kind of
sunny,
early kind of 60s,
sunny 60s period before all the drugs go wrong. It's that.
Yes,
that there.
It is. And also just as an aside, an interesting point for people that are interested in kind of film and music, kind of history and trivia. Hemmings as a younger man, he used to be in a band with Shane Meadows and Paddy Considine.
Wow, really?
Yes.
Gosh.
With Meadows as a vocalist and Considine as drummer.
Excellent. Oh, fantastic.
So,
what
have they gone on to?
So a real kind of English tradition running through this.
Yeah.
British tradition, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yes. No, it's a lovely work. They were a great live act, I seem to recall, last time around as well.
They were, indeed.
So definitely one to catch live.
I agree. So hopefully
they're touring.
think they are. And obviously this is where we would talk about the sixth album, but we're not doing the sixth album.
No.
However, there was we have genuine musical news to talk about, and timely given what day it is today, and that is the BBC's decision not to play Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead on the chart show on Sunday, and instead have someone from Newsbeat to come on and explain why they weren't playing Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, all 52 seconds of it.
Yeah, it's not a long track.
No. And as far as I'm aware, it wasn't written about Margaret Thatcher.
No, I believe it wasn't. I believe
Yeah.
it was written perhaps before she was even born.
Yeah. And I
yeah.
believe that the witch in question had a large house dropped on her.
Yes.
Although maybe that was a house that someone had bought from the council because Maggie had kind of, passed that so people could buy their own house.
I think if this really is the musical news we're talking about, I think this is. I think the BBC was treading a very difficult line, particularly in light of all the difficulties that they've had over the last 6 months or so. They're fair game at the moment, I feel. And well, hang on, we started talking about politics. So it's. I can understand why they didn't. Certainly before the funeral, there is a division in the populace on this. There are many people that would have found it totally abhorrent, as much as there are many people who would have whooped for joy had it reached number one.
Yeah. But the thing is, most of those people wouldn't have been listening to the chart show.
No, true. In fact, most of those people on both sides probably have got better things to do, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a little bit of knockabout fun. When does it become wrong to talk ill of the dead? Would Thatcher have actually acknowledged the joke? I think she'd have probably admired it in a way. She was always one for people that sort of came out and spoke against her. I think she preferred that rather to indifference and apathy. So perhaps would have secretly got the joke herself.
Well, I don't think she got the joke because she didn't
No.
have a good sense of humour or getting jokes.
No,
but I agree that she. I don't think she would have.
The campaign, I suppose, to promote it would have been something perhaps you'd have had a quiet respect for. So who knows? In terms of that news, though, in particular, people have talked a lot about the 1980s in the last week or so, understandably, and you begin to realise what an influence lyrically Margaret Thatcher was in terms of those artists that she influenced.
Well, yeah, but I also think perhaps the interesting thing about the decision, which I think was the wrong one, because I tend to agree with Paul Gambaccini that it wasn't a decision for the BBC to make, because the chart is...
you could argue it's a democratic thing.
Yeah, it's a democratic thing, and it's a record of what people have bought that week. And unless you are protecting the potential offence to witches, there is no direct lyrical content in the song that is offensive to anybody. If you're going to start banning things or stopping playing things because of perceived... people's perceived opinions on a lyric, then we're going down very worrying.
It's a worrying trend,
avenues.
and it is different to perhaps what happened during the first Gulf War, when certain artists and certain songs were banned because their lyrics could be construed in a particular way, yes, I agree entirely. It's a worrying trend when the state broadcaster starts to think.
And they also played a song that lyrics were Maggie was great, which was specifically mentions Margaret Thatcher, but apparently that was fine.
Yeah.
So again, I don't understand the logic of that.
Who wins there? Born in the USA.
Well, yeah, I agree.
The irony being missed by most people that hear it, I suppose.
So, anyway, that's us for this month.
So, we're off to the pub to argue about Depeche Mode and Margaret Thatcher.
I should just say that if you're listening to the podcast if you're listening to the podcast,
thank you.
However, you may be listening to the old feed of the podcast. So, if I would ask you to either go to the website, which is cttbmusic.co.uk, or look on our Twitter feed, which is at cttbmusic, or I will record the correct thing at the end of this, which I can't be bothered doing now, but it works after magic.
After this bit, he kicks in with that.
Yeah, after I've cut this bit out because it's waffle. And we don't babble, in fact.
No, leave that in. Leave the babble in.
Yeah, I think. Okay. So we'd like you to stay with us. We would like you to listen to our new super duper feed as opposed to our feed that's disappearing. Also, if you can't be asked doing that, if you follow us on iTunes, if you go onto iTunes, open up your iTunes store, type in CTTB Music, hit enter, and the new podcast feed should come up there. Subscribe, and Bob's your uncle, unless he isn't. Until next time.
Until next time.
As I was just saying, our current podcast feed will die after this podcast. So if you'd like to stay with us, the best way to do that are either to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes by just typing in CTTB Music into the iTunes Store search box. When we come up, it should be your only hit. Just click subscribe. Or you can go to our website, cttbmusic.co.uk, and stream us from there. Or you can paste our new RSS link feed into your RSS reader, Zune Marketplace, iTunes, Google Music Player, etc. If you look on each system for how you do this, they'll be able to tell you. But for those interested, the feed for that is http://cttbmusic.libsyn.com/RSS. This link will also be posted on the CTTB Music Twitter feed, which is at CTTB Music.
Check out our website at cttbmusic.co.uk. Also, follow us on Twitter at CTTBmusic. The CTTB Music Podcast is a Vineland production.